You don't have to look at my eyes. You're fine.
Quickly, Caleb.
Just don't look at me.
Got it.
Yeah, so tell me your name and how long you've been coming to St. Paul's.
My name is Piper Mills. I've been here at St. Paul's for about 9 months. I started last January. The idea of coming home for me is really this idea of I don't know, it reminds me of like coming to a safety net. Like you're coming to a place that you are safe and accepted, and yeah, you are welcome there, like you are wanted, and it is a place where you can be who you are. I feel like I have felt at times like I wasn't welcomed by God, but it was because I don't think I had been given the right view of who God was or how he wanted to interact with me. There have been so many instances where it feels like I'm coming to God as a child and he is welcoming me and he like picks me up and he's so excited that I'm there, and it's never with shame, but it's always with joy that I'm there. So I feel like when we leave out God's grace, when we are trying to bring people to him, it does bring this element of shame and guilt. And so when we bring people into this space and an element of shame, like God doesn't shame us into his presence. He loves us into his presence, and I just, the relationship that forms from that is completely different. I think that it has been really impactful for me to realize that God created me as a good thing. I feel like we get into a space where we are comfortable not needing his, like the safety of him like picking us up as a child, and like we never outgrow that need for his love in that way. So.
Welcome home, honey. Yeah, it's been a long time coming. You could spend your whole life running.
So I just want to thank Piper, wherever she's at. Thank her for sharing her story and bringing that forward. It can bring up a lot of emotions when we talk about what it means to come home. And I don't know if I introduced myself at the beginning when I first came out, but my name is Britton Fields. I'm lead pastor here. And I just want to welcome you into this place. And I want you to know that whether you've been coming here many times or this is one of your first times, God welcomes you into this place. God does not withhold that welcome from any person. God meets you just as you are and wants you to be here. And so welcome into this place. So this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be sharing real stories from real people who are a part of St. Paul's and just talk about the way that they have been welcomed home or been used by God to welcome people. And it's called Coming Home. So I want to share a story with you today about how a time when I went home, was coming home. I am a little embarrassed to share this story, but at the same time, I'm also really proud that this happened in my life. And so when I graduated from high school, I ended up attending college at the University of Missouri, which was about an hour from my home in Sedalia, Missouri, which is right in the middle of the state. And I was fortunate enough to take with me a car. I had a 1997 Chevrolet Monte Carlo, and it was red. Much like, isn't that a sweet, that's a sweet ride. Had a CD player. It was tricked out. And my car looked a lot like this, except minus the paint damage on the hood and some of the dents on the side. The car had been through a lot. It survived an automobile accident, car crash, and that was my fault. I've shared that story in a previous sermon. It was well loved. One of the things about the car is that the gas gauge didn't work. So I tried to get it fixed, and I got a quote on it, and it was like ungodly expensive. So I said, there's no way I'm going to fix this. And I was an engineer, so I devised a new system to fill up my gas. And it worked really well. Basically what I would do is I would reset the odometer, the trip odometer, and I would go till about however many miles. I had the number figured out in my head, and once I hit that number, I'm like, it's time to get gas. And like I said, it worked really well, except for that one time. And so I was coming home from school, and I was traveling down a road that I knew like the back of my hand because you drive it a lot. Anytime I would go to or from Columbia or back home, I would drive on I-70, Interstate 70, and it's the stretch that runs all the way from Kansas City to Columbia. So I knew that road really well, and what I was doing is I was driving home, and I grew up, at least in college, it was a golden era of music. So if you don't like the music of that era, don't get mad at me. It was a golden era of music in the sense that I could download songs illegally on the internet and burn them to a CD. So I had my own CD that I burned, and we all did it, so don't come at me. I know you didn't. And I was, rocking out to my own mixed CD, and it hit me that I hadn't checked my odometer in some time. So I looked at the odometer. It was about 50 miles over when I typically stop. I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to need to stop as soon as I can. So I was on the lookout for the next available exit that had a gas station. That's what I was going to do. So I go into, emergency measures. I'm taking these extreme precautions. I'm not stepping on the gas unless I have to. I'm turning cruise control off. I'm coasting, only, accelerating just a little bit if I need to. And about a minute goes into this, and the engine shuts off. So I'm on I-70, just coasting down the road, going pretty fast. I'm going probably about 70 miles an hour. And there's an exit that's right up the road. I know this well. There's an exit. And I devised a strategy. I'm going to take this exit ramp as fast as I can. There's nobody in front of me. So I'm just coasting, and I take the exit ramp as fast as I can. And when I get to the top of the ramp, there's an intersection there, but nobody's coming. Now, you're supposed to stop at this stop sign at the top of the ramp, and I take it as fast as I can. I curve it. I'm like, and it's screeching, to turn the corner, and then I take a right, and I go around the corner as fast as I possibly can, and then I go into the gas station, another right, and I coast all the way, kid you not, right to the gas pump. Put her in park, get my gas. Like nothing ever happened. Can you see why I'm proud to tell that story? This was like a movie moment for me. But it felt so good, to be able to have that, to get to the gas pump and have no delays. Why? Because I just wanted to get home. You know that feeling of you just want to get home because you want to be there. Home's a good place to be. And that's because home it's more than just a place to stay. It's home. So growing up, I had a friend. His name was Jason, and we were like best buddies. We'd play at one another's house. We had school together, and he lived on a farm. And it was a family generational farm. So he had a house on one side of the street, and then his grandparents and uncle lived on the other side of the street, so they had a lot of property with multiple houses on it, and they all took care of the farm together. So I would go to his house and play, and we would have fun getting on like dirt bikes and four-wheelers and riding around the property. And one day, or often we would go by his grandparents' house, and his grandmother's house. His grandfather had passed. And his grandmother, there's two things I remember about his grandmother. Mrs. Sneed was her name. That's what I called her. And she liked to smoke, so she had this little sunroom in the house where she would smoke her cigarettes, and she liked to play Game Boy, and she'd play Tetris on her Game Boy, and that's what she would do. And she did these things, I think, more after her husband had passed, but she loved having visitors. So Jason and I went over there one time, and we're growing boys, we're hungry, so we asked for snacks, and she goes to this walk-in pantry that they have in their house. It's this old walk-in pantry in this farmhouse. And there's something you should know about me. I had this little ritual that I would do. Sometimes I would walk to my grandmother's house coming home from school. And she was just a few blocks from school, and I would wait there for my parents to come get me. And I had this sort of ritual I would go through. I would go to her house, and in the kitchen, she had a little TV. It was an old dial television. And it looked like this. So a really important strategy, if you've ever worked with one of these before, you got to get the channel set just right and the volume. Because once it's set, you are going to be too lazy to get up from where you are to change the station. So she had a bar that I would sit at, and I would get the TV set, and there was a little bar kind of in the kitchen, and I would pour myself a glass of milk, and I would go to her pantry. And I can picture this container in my mind. In the pantry, she had a tan or beige, nondescript container. There was no identifiable markers on it. It looked like this. It was not Ovaltine, but it kind of looked like this. It was that old, and it had that lid, that dark brown lid. It was plastic, and it had like a corkscrew top, and you could spin it off and open it up. And always inside that container were Oreos that she would keep for me. So I would get my glass of milk, and I'd get my Oreos, and I'd sit down, and I would watch whatever was on after school. Typically, I wanted to watch some sort of cartoons or something. Every now and then, Power Rangers was on, and I don't like Power Rangers personally. I thought it was really annoying, but I'd watch it because I'm not turning the channel, and I would eat my Oreos there at the bar in my grandmother's kitchen. And so when my friend's grandmother, when Jason's grandmother came back from her trip to the pantry, she brought me some Oreos, and she looks at me and says, "Your grandmother tells me you like Oreos." Now, I wasn't at home, but it felt like home. And that's because home it's not a place to stay. It's home. So I had a business trip. It was a 4-week-long business trip I took whenever I was working in the corporate world, and it was halfway around the world. It was in South Africa. And Ashley, were you pregnant at the time? I couldn't remember if you were pregnant or not. Shelby was about 2 years old, but you said 18. Okay, 18 months. I'm going with your number. So Shelby was 18 months old, so I had to leave my wife and, we're first-time parents at home, and I was in South Africa. And I was kind of excited about the trip. It's a really cool opportunity, but it's also really hard to leave home and leave that behind. And so I got there, and the project I was to work on was a dumpster fire. That's the best way I can describe it. And it was very clear that from the get-go, I was going to have to do more work than the 4 weeks allotted. So I had to extend my stay a couple weeks. And so I still remember calling and crying on the phone and telling Ashley, I won't be home for another couple weeks because I missed you all so much. And it wasn't that I didn't like the people that I was with or even the work that I was doing. It wasn't home. Or it didn't feel like home, because home's not just a place to stay. It's home. I love these stories of soldiers who come home. They have these montages of people who have surprised their loved ones. You can watch these videos, and they're really powerful. And I think what's so powerful about it is there's this longing that we have for one another and to welcome people back home. And I think there's always this lingering question that, maybe my loved one won't come home. And so when they do, especially after a year or longer, it hits you like a ton of bricks, and you lose it. There was a story I read about a man, his name was Kenya Nelson. He's pictured with his family, his wife Bree, and one of his children. And he got to come home right before Christmas. And what that meant for him and his family, these intense feelings. See, home is more than just it's not just a place to stay, it's home. So I'm going to read a story from Scripture today, and this is from Luke, the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 15. And it's the story of the prodigal son. Now, if you were in church, we read this not even that long ago. Todd Taylor, our director of kids, preached on it. And in his sermon, he did an amazing job, by the way, but in his sermon, he talked about how this is, I think it is the longest parable in all of that Jesus tells, just lengthwise. And so because it's the longest, there's a lot in the story. So we're going to go back to it, and I think this story is really going to guide for us that feeling of what it's like to come home. So I'm going to read this, and then we'll get into it a little bit. So the words are on the screen. I'm starting in verse 11 again, chapter 15. So Jesus said, a certain man had 2 sons. The younger son said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the inheritance." And then the father divided his estate between them. Soon afterward, the younger son gathered everything together and took a trip to a land far away. There he wasted his wealth through extravagant living. And when he had used up his resources, a severe food shortage arose, in that country and he began to be in need. He hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. He longed to eat his fill from what the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, but I'm starving to death? I will get up and go to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Take me on as one of your hired hands.' So he got up and went to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. There's this 13th century mystic, his name's Meister Eckhart, and he says, you may call God goodness, you may call God love, but the best name for God is compassion. So you see God's compassion show up here. And his father ran to him and hugged him and kissed him. And then his son said, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Fetch the fattened calf and slaughter it. We must celebrate with feasting. Because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. And now his older son was in the field. Coming in from the field, he approached the house and heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked, "What is going on?" The servant replied, "Your brother has arrived and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he received his son back, safe and sound." Then the older son was furious and didn't want to enter in, but his father came out and begged him. He answered his father, "Look, I've served you all these years and I've never disobeyed your instruction. Yet you've never given me as much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours returned after gobbling up your estate on prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him." And then the father said, "Son, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." So what the father demonstrates in this story is he demonstrates that home, it's not just a place to stay. It's a home. It's so much more than that. And the son knows it. Listen to what the son says in chapter 17. He says, "How many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, but I'm starving to death?" So he knows that he can go home to his father, and in some sense, he's going to be taken care of there better than the world is taking care of him. So he wants to go back, and because he knows what that welcome can feel like. And what happens in the story, it's even more ridiculous than what the son could ever imagine. So in this particular story, this parable, there are what I would call distinctive markers of the kingdom of heaven, or of the characteristics of God who invites and welcomes all of us to come home. So I'm going to go through 4 of them. You can write them down if you want. But the first is excitement. The father is excited to see the son there. He runs out to him, and not only that, he throws them this big party with music and all of the best food. There's excitement for a son who was lost but now is found. And likewise, for you here today, God is excited that you're here in this place. God is thrilled, is jubilant that you're here in this place to receive you back home. So one of the feelings we can do as a church and as a community is we can be excited for people who have found their way back, or are excited for ourselves. The second one is there's this extravagant welcome. So in the son's wasteful spending, the father welcomes him back, but he does so extravagantly. And I love how the son has this all planned out in his head. He's like, I've sinned against heaven, so I've sinned against God, and I've sinned against my father. There's no way that I can be received back in the same way, so I'm just going to go tell him that I'll work as one of your hired hands. But before he could even say those words, the father runs to him. And then he tells the father, he says, "Dad, I've sinned against you. I've sinned against heaven. I'll be one of your hired hands. The father doesn't even answer the question. You notice that in the story. It's not even an issue. The father tells his servants to go prepare the food for the party. There's this extravagant welcome with God. It's like as soon as we want to utter the words, God, will you receive me? Will you forgive me? It's already happened. Third thing, there's risk. Think about the father and what people might say. Who are you to go and give back to your son? Isn't that enabling? Isn't that wasteful? The father is willing to risk himself and his reputation. Who cares what anyone else thinks? What matters is my son has returned. So he risks himself on behalf of his son. What's it look like for a people and a church community to risk ourselves, our reputation for other folks? And the last one is this: it's a safe place to be. Home should be safe. Now I realize in all four of these things, if we go to our physical homes, we may not have those characteristics present, but that's not the way it is with God. God wants these things to be present in our lives. So when you think about safety, there's a place of peace that we can come to. The absence of chaos, a place where we're not under attack, but we can find rest. I love some of the Psalms that talk about this idea of safety. Put it a little bit differently, use different language. Psalm 91, 1 through 2 says this: living in the most high shelter, camping in the almighty shade, I say to the Lord, you are my refuge, my stronghold. You are my God, the one I trust. My refuge, my stronghold, my sanctuary. You know, when the words out here, when you come into this room, it says worship center. And we used to call this place a sanctuary. I think worship center is fine, but I do love the word sanctuary. And I think about how that is a place of safety for anyone to come into the presence of God. I can walk in there and I can be in the refuge and stronghold of God, the one that I can trust. So for you and I to create an environment of safety, to welcome people in, to be received by God, man, that's where it's at. That is right where it's at. So people can come and feel safe and they can receive that warm hug, that embrace from God. So this happens in the story. It's all of this happens to the younger son who returns. But the older son is irritated. And I would have responded to him. There's a line from Darth Vader that I use in parenting sometimes. And he says, perhaps you think you've been treated unfairly, which is maybe what I would have said. But the father doesn't do that. He offers grace to the older son as well. He extends the same feelings that he offered to the younger son, to the older son. And he says, you've been with me. Everything that I have is yours. And the father teaches us that the very thing that we should be excited about is what the father is excited about. And listen, the father in the story, he doesn't care about his stuff, his belongings, again, his reputation. He's excited that someone has made their way back home. See, it's not just a place to stay. It's home. I want to close with a quote from Piper Mills. She was in the video earlier, and she says this. She said, we cannot be shamed into a relationship with God. We must be loved into it. Isn't that a great quote? And that's the way I've experienced it in my life. So if you're here today and you've been running from God, or you feel like you're not good enough to be in the presence of God, if you're unsure what it is that you believe, if you've been putting off a relationship with God because, you know what, like church will be there, I'll get back to it later. If you've been going through the motions, God is calling to you. And God is excited, and God is risking everything that he has to welcome you back home. See, it's not just a place to stay. It's home. Let's pray. God, we thank you for the gift of your son, someone who would come to us to pull us and will us back to you. someone who would reveal to us your character and your nature, a God who would love without ceasing, a God who would give and continue to give even when we waste it. God, thank you for the radical welcome and the way that you have received each and every one of us here today. May we know the depth of that truth for our lives here in this place. And may we do everything under our power, inspire within us a desire to extend that radical welcome to others, one that's risky, extravagant, and helps people to come to that place of safety and peace. And we do all these things for your glory. We ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, and everyone gathered here says, amen.